I first noticed something that I would later characterize as a placebo effect when I returned from China after a 5-year intense stint studying herbalism and acupuncture. I opened a small practice in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I started to see patients. I put lots of diplomas on the wall, and I displayed hundreds of herbs, like this gentleman, herbalist on the slide. And I started to see patients. And I listened attentively. I had a meaningful conversation. I did an exam. I touched them where it hurt. And then I would start to write an herbal prescription. And I noticed that sometimes people sort of looked different when I was writing my prescription. They were lit up a little bit, more in their skin. And then they would walk out with the prescription in their hand, way before they could take something. And I noticed they had more mobility, seemingly less pain. I freaked. And I said, Lord, Lord, don't make me a psychic healer. I felt like Jeremiah and Jonah must have felt when they were called to prophecy and walked the other direction. A number of years later, I was recruited to Harvard Medical School to help investigate potential new therapies based on Asian medicine. And of course, I had to be rehabilitated. And one of the things I was taught was that it's really critical to find out whether these new therapies have more than a placebo effect. And I asked, so what is this placebo effect? And I was told it's the placebo effect is the effect of an inert substance, the effect of something that has no effect. I didn't freak. I didn't want to freak at Harvard. And I realized this was an oxymoron. And I realized very quickly that I would change my career from Asian medicine to placebo effects. Actually, placebo effects is a way of quantifying and measuring everything that surrounds pills and procedures, mainstream or alternative. They're about the rituals, the words, the engagement, the costumes, the diplomas, and those special things that you get when you go to a healer. They're about how the drama of healthcare can alleviate symptoms and change the course of disease, even without pharmaceuticals. And placebos are not only about the imagination and the mind. They actually work through neurotransmitters and brain circuitry that, in fact, many important drugs recruit and hijack. And the drugs actually mimic what the body can already do, not the other way around. Let me show you some experiments, mostly from my team. The first experiment we did was we wanted to find out how engagement changes the placebo effect, how the doctor-patient relationship actually changes the paraphernalia of healthcare. And to do this, we took recruited 262 patients with irritable bowel syndrome and randomized them to 3 groups. The first group was an intake. They did the questionnaires and had an exam, but there was no treatment. The second group, we added the paraphernalia of healthcare, placebos. But we truncated the doctor-patient interaction. We just wanted to have as little as possible. The third group had the same intake, the same placebo treatments, and we added an engaged interaction. The interaction included attentive listening, thoughtful conversation, laying on of hands. In 6 weeks, this is what happened. People who had no treatment had 27% adequate relief. This was not a placebo effect. Time by itself, no treatment, heals. The people who got placebo treatments, 42% reported adequate relief, had adequate relief. And we added the engaged interaction. There was a big boost, 62% reported adequate relief. I think this experiment is pretty interesting. It demonstrates that the paraphernalia, placebos, are just not the simulation of therapy is more than time itself, take more than no treatment. And then when you add an engaged interaction, it's a significant boost. This experiment also had a very important secondary benefit personally, which I didn't report in the scientific article. I realized more comfortably that I wasn't a psychic healer. In fact, I was an attentive practitioner. The second experiment I want to tell you about was also performed by our team. And we wanted to see if we could take something very subtle that we usually don't think matters. In this case, we decided to take words. In fact, one word, and see if we could use one word and change the effect of a good pharmaceutical. To do this, we took a group of migraine patients, migraine sufferers, and we arranged to observe 459 headaches. And 459 acute episodic episodes of migraine, right? During acute phase. And during each one of those 459 headaches, we gave patients either Maxalt, a drug that is effective for aborting a migraine headache, or placebos. The pills were indistinguishable. And we put the pills before the attack in an envelope, and we put different words on the envelope. Let me show you what happened, at least some of what happened. When we gave patients, during the acute attack, placebos, and on the envelope we wrote Maxalt, we gave them the anticipation of relief. On average, patients reported 30% reduction in their pain in 2.5 hours. When we gave them the drug, but the envelope said placebo, we took out the positive anticipation and gave them the pure pharmacology of the drug. On average, patients reported 38% improvement in their pain in 2.5 hours. The numbers 30 and 38 here are not statistically different, meaning that placebos with positive expectation is no different in this case than pharmaceutical drug with no anticipation, a positive anticipation. Then we did something really nice. We took Maxalt, the real drug, and put it in an envelope, and we changed one word. We changed the word placebo to Maxalt. This is what happened. On average, patients reported a reduction in pain of 62%. Just a subtle change of one word, obviously a very important word, had a dramatic impact on a good pharmaceutical. The third experiment I want to tell you about was also from our team. Came in this way. People would, I'd walk down the halls and people would drop by and they say, "How are you doing? What are you doing, Ted?" And I said, I study placebos. And they say, "Oh, yeah, you study trickery and deception." And I got, I felt a little bad. I thought I was studying words of hope, acts of decency, and the laying on of hands. And I thought that's important, and honesty and integrity is probably a key ingredient. So I went to our gastroenterologist, Dr. Lembo, and said, "Tony, what I want to do is take irritable bowel patients and give them placebos and tell them it's placebos. The bottle will say placebos. I want them on the informed consent to say, I understand I may receive a placebo. We want to give them an explanation of why it might work, because we didn't know if it would, and I want to compare it to a no treatment control." This is what happened. When patients were given no treatment after a period of time, this is a 3-week experiment, they reported 30% of those patients reported adequate relief. Again, time heals without the intervention of healthcare, and we're lucky for that. When we gave them placebos, and the bottle said placebo, every way you could imagine it, we made sure they knew, patients reported 60% adequate relief, demonstrating that in this situation at least, placebo effects are compatible with honesty. And I speculate that, in fact, that's the key active ingredient, along with trust and integrity. So the question is, how does this all work? What's the neurobiology, the basic science here? The beginning of an answer, I think, can come from the idea in cognitive science that the brain can function as a prediction machine. And what this means is, for example, you're in a forest, you're walking along, you know the forest is full of snakes, and you see a long, slender object. Your brain's visual processing will see that object as a snake, even though it's a stick. Anticipatory mechanisms are critical for human survival. It's built deep into us. Analogously, I would say that when a person feels sick and down, and you go into an environment that's designed to help you, you go into an environment where everyone around in that environment wants to help you and provide you relief. And you're in an environment that these people know every kind of technology that society has to make you feel better. The brain's processing of sensations, self-awareness, and symptom changes, sometimes in a very positive way. Now, this idea, this theory, is more than a theory. In the last 15 years, there's been an enormous amount of research demonstrating that this actually happens. So I'm going to show you one experiment. It's done by a team in Vancouver. And it's an old experiment. It's a small experiment, but it's iconic. And one of the things it did was change the way we think about placebos. What researchers did was take, it's a small experiment, you see, but it's really nice. They took 6 patients with Parkinson's disease and who were on stable dose of levodopa, and they took them off the medication, reducing the amount of dopamine in their brains. And dopamine is important to inhibit the bursting and misfiring of neurons that's responsible for the shakiness and rigidity of Parkinson's. And of course, they've got more symptomatic. Then what they did is neuroimage them in symptomatic place. And what they saw was, this image is a striatum, they were focusing there. And the redness there, for a moment, please take my word, is related to the diminishing amounts of dopamine in their brain. I'll explain it, maybe it'll drop better later. Then what they did was give those 6 patients at different times either levodopa, the dosage they were on originally, or placebo pills. They were indistinguishable. This is what happens to patients' brains. This is a composite of those 6 patients. The diminished redness there is a sign that there's more dopamine in the brain. Now, what's really interesting about this experiment is it uses the technology of positron emission tomography, which uses radioactive ligands or isotopes to tag neurotransmitters in the brain and allows you to give a precise readout of the level of the neurotransmitter you're tagging, right? Precisely in real time. This is what they saw. The brains of those people, while taking placebo, increased the amount of dopamine by 200%, equivalent to their stable dose of levodopa before they were taken off their drugs. That's amazing. What just happened there is the brain released the very same chemicals that physicians give patients when they have Parkinson's disease. And I think that's an amazing experiment. This experiment has been replicated several times, more elaborately. And importantly, there have been other experiments, other conditions, other neurotransmitters, other areas of the brain. And what we're finding is consistent. For example, when a person is treated with the rituals, symbols, placebos, the pills, whether they have content or not, when you're in pain, the brain releases endogenous opioids, cannabinoids, and/or prostaglandins. There's a veritable pharmacy in each and every one of us. So let me recap what I've been saying from a little bit more historical perspective. When researchers investigating pharmaceuticals started to use placebo controls in clinical trials, they noticed that patients responded sometimes with placebo treatment, got better, right? They didn't care. It was a nuisance. What they were committed to is a precise pharmacological solution to the question of illness. And I understand that. Fluffy stuff, hard to quantify stuff, like the art of medicine especially, became more and more neglected. We were going to do science. What Placebo Studies does is take the tools of medicine and changes the art of medicine into the science of clinical care, and demonstrates that the human dimensions of providing health care can alleviate symptoms and change the course of illness, even without pharmaceuticals. Now, this doesn't mean that we want to replace pharmaceuticals and drugs with placebos. Placebos can't shrink tumors, can't lower cholesterol, and placebo-like effects are probably are often very valuable for making a good drug a better drug, like I described before. But what we're saying, and I'm saying, is that we need to have rebalancing. And I'd like to end by saying, I hope you can join me in re-envisioning and expecting a healthcare system that balances good medication with good human care. Thank you so much.